La innovación es simple. La innovación ayuda a cambiar vidas, a salvar personas. Con la innovación nosotros podemos encontrar algo muy sencillo, pero tenemos que tener claro que no solamente tiene un valor económico, tiene un valor social, genera un impacto medioambiental y, aún más importante, gracias a la tecnología, nosotros podemos hacer posible lo imposible. Muchas gracias, Bárbara, por invitarme. Estoy aquí para presentarles el nuevo bloque. Nos toca ahora las plataformas digitales, mitos y verdades, que es el nombre del nuevo bloque, con blockchain, mitos y verdades, casos de éxito aplicado a diversas industrias, y expondrá Samantha Radocchia, emprendedora serial. Por favor, un aplauso para Samantha.
Hello, everyone. Hi. It's good. It's not siesta hour, it's blockchain hour, which is often the same thing. So today I'm going to talk to you about blockchain, but more broadly, decentralization and the cultural and social shifts that have led to these changes in technologies. So before I start, I want to start with a story. This is obviously a map, and I bet you're thinking to yourself, oh, what does a map have to do with blockchain? So let's rewind. When I was 16 years old, like many of us, I had the opportunity to travel and go abroad. And so at the time, there were not cell phones, there was not GPS or any of the technologies that we're accustomed to today. And so I travel, I get there, and I pull out my map, and I take a leisurely 10 days to get to the school or call my parents. But I ultimately got there, and I had a great time. So let's fast forward 10 years later. So when I was 26, I moved to San Francisco. And I started a company when I was there. And I moved very quickly, so I didn't have time to really unpack my apartment or anything. I arrived that first day. And how did I get to my first meeting? I had no idea where I was. So I used this. I used Uber. And I spent 3 years there and still didn't really get the lay of the land because I was so used to this technology. And so before I continue with the story, I want to do a little survey with the audience here. And so let's get out of our seats. I'm going to ask a question or a few questions of you. I would like for you to stand up if you've ever used your mobile phone to request a taxi, or you've used something like Uber here, or Cabify. So stand up and shake it out. I know it's after lunch. So that's ride sharing. I'd like, if you haven't stood up yet, to stand up if you've ever gotten food delivery. Do we have everyone? Okay. And then if you can, stand up if you've ever booked a hotel or an Airbnb on your cell phone. And finally, stand up if you've ever used a review like Yelp or Google reviews. And finally, and last but not least, if you've ever used a map. So now take a look around and stretch it out because it's the last time that you'll be standing for a while. That's most of you, if not all of you in this room. So you can sit down, and I'll get back to my story. So in the late 90s, in early 2000s, companies like MapQuest, if you remember, were working on map technology. And they thought, we're just building a better map. We're going to digitize this. So take this physical thing and put it online and give people directions. So in 2005, however, a company called Google, that you might know, decided to take the concept of a map and completely flip it on its head. And so they looked at maps differently. They said, this is basically data, location data, and we're going to let people, developers, and companies build on top of this. It was a totally new way of thinking, of looking at both maps and of data. And so we see Uber and Lyft and Cabify and ride sharing. We see the rise of food delivery. We see the rise of Airbnb. We see Yelp and online location-based reviews. We even see dating, which I didn't ask you to stand up for obvious reasons, but that existed too. So the question is, how did we get from this map to this app in the span of 10 years? And so was it a better technology, or did Google make maps better? Not necessarily, but they changed how they thought about the concept of a digital map and opened it up. And that's what I'm here to talk about today, because blockchain, to me, and to most people in this room, isn't just a technology. It represents an evolution of thought. And so the 3 steps today, the title of the talk is Operating System for the Future. And so we'll go first through the past and present, so how did we get here, in the ways that we relate as human beings, and by extension, where this technology came from. And then ultimately get to the operating system of the future, which is distributed, and globalized, and decentralized. So what do I mean by operating systems? Am I talking about computing? Sure, yeah, there are operating systems in computing. There are also operating systems in nature that route how resources are used. And finally, as an anthropologist, and where I spend most of my time, we have operating systems in society. So how we relate to each other, how we exchange, governments, social norms, mores, religion, these are all operating systems, how we relate. And so first, let's start with the operating system, or how we as humans relate to ourselves and to technology in the past, which was localized. So to illustrate this story, I'll start with yet another story. This is a rock, something I called a zebra rock, and I bet you're thinking, obviously, yes, I know what that is. So obviously, there are black and white stripes like a zebra. And this was something that I used to find with my brothers in our backyard growing up. And we'd collect these rocks in the backyard, and we'd store them in buckets, and we'd use them as a currency. And so this expanded beyond just buying stuff from each other's closets. We started using it with the other neighborhood kids. So anytime someone had a lemonade stand, you paid in zebra rocks. And anytime the ice cream truck came around, you'd find someone who had dollars and give them zebra rocks, and they'd give you dollars to buy the ice cream. And then we even established this whole exchange rate between dollars and zebra rocks and acorns. It got very complex. It was a whole thing. So if you're wondering where I got my love of blockchain and cryptocurrencies and banking, it started here collecting rocks as a 7-year-old. So back to the story, this is my brother Mike. We decided with all these rocks, we couldn't keep storing them under our beds and in our closets. We needed a bank. So we made the first bank of zebra rocks. He was in charge of storing all of the rocks, lending the rocks to the other kids, and setting the exchange rates. Until one day there was this terrible scandal. So we find out that Mike had been stealing some of the rocks. And to make things worse, he had a crush on this girl, and he would give her a better rate than the other boys. So it turned into this whole crazy thing. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but when I think of this story, I think a lot about our operating systems, both of the past and of the present. And so when you think of the past, where we put our trust and how we exchange things with each other was based in community. So this local neighborhood exchange. And again, it was localized communication exchange. So you'd see the objects, you'd see the people, you'd see everything face to face and in person. And so if something happened, you could go knock on someone's door and say, you know, hey, Mike, you're doing bad things with this zebra rock bank. And so there are obviously problems with this operating system. It was extremely limited. It was way more expensive, inefficient, and smaller in scale. And so we, as humans, evolved amongst other technologies. So we went from this village, with the rise of globalization and communications technologies and global supply chains and changes in manufacturing, we connected our villages. And then we became a globally connected village. And so that brought us to the operating system of the present, which is centralized. And so communication now has become digitized and global. We can send messages instantly around the world. And so we've placed our trust now, instead of peer-to-peer or directly in the local neighborhood, in institutions. And so a lot has changed, but really not much has changed. Because we've just taken these systems as if we were still in a village or, you know, trading rocks with each other, and we're doing it on a global scale. And so there are obviously problems that have emerged in this current operating system as well. It's centralized. So anything from our finances, to our data, to what we buy, to what we eat, to what we know, is centralized, and there are gatekeepers. And with all of this centralization, there are numerous single points of failure or gaps in trust that have formed. The present operating system is opaque. And so when you buy a coffee or produce, you trust that the claims about it are true. Or when you give your information to a social network, you trust that they're not using it nefariously. But there's really no way of knowing. In the present operating system, it's siloed. And so because of this, and because of these business models and trust gaps, our organizations have created these vast moats and withheld data and are not sharing it, which has led to a very reactive mindset. So I think there's a statistic of when there has been a food recall, take up to 7 days to trace where the source of the bad food was. And of course, with newer systems now, we've gotten this down to 6 seconds, but still right now, we're spending a lot of time tracking things down because of the fragmentation of our systems. And so ultimately, then we need regulations and institutions in place to overcome these trust gaps. And so in short, we trust these systems and institutions, kind of. And so another story, back to San Francisco, when I had moved there the first time, I was starting a company and I didn't have time to unpack. So I had boxes everywhere, I had no idea where anything was, and I was immediately off to that first meeting. And so about 2 days later, I get a knock on my door, and I open it, and it's a police officer, and I'm like, "Hello, officer, how was your day?" And he says, "Are you missing anything, ma'am?" And I said, "Well, look around, I don't know, it's just boxes." And so I get a little worried, and that night I look through everything, and it turns out I'm missing my passport and my credit cards and jewelry and a bunch of stuff, and it was just a crazy hectic situation. But what made it even worse and crazier was that when I went to the leasing office to get access records to my apartment, because we used one of these key card NFC keys to get in the apartment, they wouldn't give me the information. And so ultimately I needed to get a warrant to get the access records to my own apartment to find out who stole the things. And so that was the moment in time for me where I realized the world we live in today, the operating system that we live in today, is one of lacking. So ultimately, the conclusion is that, sure, we lack access and knowledge and control due to these trust gaps, but ultimately we lack trust. Now, I'm not here to talk to you about what we lack. I'm not here to talk to you about fear or more stories of getting robbed. I'm here to talk to you about the future, the operating system of the future. And so that brings us again to decentralization and blockchain. Because again, the world has completely changed and it's a globalized, distributed context. And so, quick show of hands, who's heard of a blockchain and knows what blockchain is? Okay, it's a good amount. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on what it is, more so why it's important and what you can do with it. Because, let's be real, I was having a conversation yesterday, and I was thinking about plumbing, the concept of infrastructure in a city. And so when we first started becoming urban dwellers, and we didn't have plumbing, obviously people were getting cholera, water was dirty, it was terrible. And so we built this infrastructure, energy, plumbing, and it completely changed things. But you don't go around Santiago looking for the plumbing. All you see is the city. So we won't spend a lot of time talking about blockchain, because at the end of the day, and what it should be is the plumbing. But ultimately, this plumbing is a digital ledger. So everything that's recorded on this ledger cannot be changed, and it's globally distributed and decentralized. So the same copy of that information is stored on every ledger around the world. And there are these things called smart contracts as well that allow you to program logic on top of the ledger. And again, I don't spend a lot of time talking about what this is, because at the end of the day, while it's really badass, it's not that exciting. The one thing that makes me excited about it is that when you think about ledgers, the basis of human communication, and we heard this in a talk yesterday, was based on a ledger. And so humans, when we moved from nomadic to agrarian people and started farming, the first written record was a record of the crops. And so when you think about it, a ledger is everywhere. So to illustrate this, I know many of you, because of who stood up, have ordered food delivery from a food delivery app or service or directly. And so I personally like pizza. I order a lot of pizza. This is probably something that we've gone through. So Alice has ordered a pizza and she didn't receive it. So she calls Bob. She goes, I never received my pizza. And Bob says, yes, my system says that it was delivered. And then she says, well, no, it's not here, so obviously it wasn't delivered. And she calls back, and Bob says, I talked to the delivery driver, and he says in his system it was delivered. And she's like, well, no, it's not. He says, yes, it is. And then you ultimately get to this part of prove it. Or if you're using one of these food delivery apps, you're talking with a chatbot that's probably not responding to you. And so the question I'll pose to you, which is a rhetorical question, is Alice lying, or did Bob lose the pizza? The answer is we really don't know. And we see these interactions on a daily basis due to these trust gaps. So we see it in supply chain, we see it in banking, we see it in energy. And so with a blockchain system, all of these transactions and all of these interactions are recorded. And the data on it would tell you where exactly that pizza is. So we have a good situation. Now obviously this situation is incredibly simplistic, but it describes just one small interaction where you have two people who don't know each other, don't trust each other, know nothing about each other, having a he said, she said interaction. So we can see this a lot with things like greenwashing and claims made by brands and a distrust there. We can see this in the media, journalism with fake news. There's a lot of distrust. And so this is where blockchains come in, because as our future has become globalized, distributed, and decentralized, blockchains are the operating systems or the infrastructure for this future. And it's one part of the stack, the technological stack and the social stack. And so in the new operating system, we remember this is where we are today, will become decentralized, transparent, connected, proactive, and ultimately inclusive. So I know that the section of this talk is beyond the myths, and I bet you're thinking I'm going to go through some myths about blockchain and prove you wrong. But I'm not. I'm actually going to go through some myths about society and show you how blockchain proves them wrong. So myth number one, this is what money looks like. This is what money actually looks like today. So digitized, zeros and ones on computers and systems all around the world. It's become digital and global. Yet we're still thinking that money is, these rocks that we carry around in bags. Money could even look like this. So we remember the dress, the $10,000 dress from yesterday. That is an example of value on a blockchain network. Or money could look like these digital kitties. And people are trading that and exchanging that, or even getting paid in them for doing work. So blockchain is an operating system for value and for money. It enables things like new currencies like Bitcoin or Ethereum or other currencies that are state-backed. It allows the instant and frictionless transfer of value around the world without fees, and it's open 24/7. Myth number two, this is what work looks like. So drum roll, this is actually what work is starting to look like, and we've heard a lot of talks on the future of work as well. So blockchain offers an operating system for the future of work as well. So we have this new decentralized model of how people work, but we need the infrastructure to support them, both in payments, where you can imagine someone working not for one company, but for hundreds of them, living all over the world, getting paid in different currencies on different time zones. There are blockchain systems that are supporting benefits packages, so actually moving kind of beyond or working with insurance companies in order to provide people global insurance. So it is the backbone for the gig economy. And also, even this is work. Again, what we've heard in other talks. So gaming and streaming. Many of them getting paid in cryptocurrencies or new business models that involve what's called the tipping economy. And so in the future, maybe when you provide a comment on Reddit or answer something on Quora, you'll get paid a fractional payment either in a local denomination or a cryptocurrency based on a blockchain. So the nature of work itself, or the term itself, is changing in this decentralized future. Myth number 3, this is what education looks like. So again, we've got the centralized institution of a school. This is actually what education looks like. So before I came here, I was in Valparaiso, and I met someone, and he had great English, and we were just talking. I said, where did you learn this? You know, at university? He said, no, video games. I prefer the English games over the Spanish games. And so gaming is potentially what education can look like. Or, of course, coding academies. And so blockchain offers a new operating system for education. So beyond just seeing, again, coding boot camps or distributed schools, we're seeing systems start to form in terms of credentialing. So the role of the school or the university in the past in providing the degree or the credentials is now moving to a blockchain, where you might get credentials from your 20 hours of gaming proficiency and your 10 hours of visiting this country. It's also providing new funding models and revenue share agreements for schools. So instead of the concept of a tuition, after you finish this education, you might participate in a revenue share agreement, all based on blockchain. So myth number 4, this is what manufacturing looks like. So I bet you know what's coming next. This is what it actually looks like, and we're all talking about robots and automation. So a lot of this is happening in manufacturing, and this is an area that I work in deeply. And so beyond even that of just automation, we're seeing the decentralization of production in general, where the concept of a single solitary factory producing one or many objects and shipping them all over the world is completely changing. And so we're having mini micro factories that consist of 3D printers and are producing parts on demand and as needed. And we're seeing this first in the aerospace industry. So GE has many of the patents and is working on the combination of both blockchain and industrial 3D printers for replacement aerospace parts. So instead of making something in a factory and storing it for 10 years until it's needed in the airplane, it's actually produced as needed. And the blockchain operates as a network to store the intellectual property or design file, because that's millions of dollars of IP that is not just going to go sit on a database. And so we're seeing this as well in textiles, so how clothing is being produced, localized, on demand, which is also more sustainable and more circular. And we're seeing this in automotive as well. So I had meetings with a number of the top auto companies, and because of things like tariffs and trade wars, as well as the growing pressure to produce things more sustainably, they're actually moving their model to a more decentralized model of having smaller, locally based microfactories closer to where the demand is. So myth number 5, this is what agriculture looks like, and I know this is a big industry here in Chile. So due to things like climate change and demand, farming and agriculture is also becoming more decentralized, closer to where the demand is for production, closer to the cities. And so we're seeing this through vertical farming. So decentralization and blockchain, the operating system for this new agriculture, means completely new means of production, opening up this data, and having new means of quality and insurance. So what we're seeing even today, quality assurance. So when I talk about lettuce, IBM is most known for tracking the lettuce in the blockchain, and they were able to get the romaine lettuce that had been recalled down from 7 days to identifying it in 6 seconds on the system. And also we're seeing this with certifications. And so things like proof of origin, so wine made in Chile, or certified organic. Again, because as people have lost trust in these systems, we're now restoring trust with these directly registered or proof of origin registered on a blockchain. And finally, as we move or decentralize the agriculture closer to cities, we're opening up all this free land. And so again, I know in the north of Chile, there is quite a bit of solar farming, so we're making new use of this land. And the concept of agriculture, what you're actually farming, might be radically different. And myth number 6, this is what healthcare looks like. So again, centralized hospital beds. This is what it actually looks like. So people are recovering and aging at home. And blockchain offers an operating system for healthcare, so medical records being completely interoperable between all of these services from all of these providers all around the world, and democratizing that healthcare data so that you can do with it what you please, shop for new insurance products, or have personalized medication and healthcare. In myth number 7, this is what transportation looks like. And this is what it actually looks like. So we're moving both from rideshare to autonomous vehicles. And so an example of this in the industry is a system by which the autonomous vehicle is actually charging at a stop sign. And the car itself has a blockchain-based wallet. So it's now powering machine-to-machine interactions where the car on its own pays for its own energy and goes on its way. And it earns its own money you know, from the passengers that it's driving. It's completely on its own. And finally, myth number 8, this is what governance looks like. And so what it actually looks like is here, again, on our phones, globally distributed. And so blockchain offers a system for governance, a way for people in a trusted way to participate in their local governments, in their corporations, from their phone in a secure manner. Now, again, I could go on all day about all of the examples. It's just the tip of the iceberg. And the point is, because it's so much bigger than a technology, because it's a cultural and social and geopolitical shift, it is touching every industry. And it's working with every technology because it is the infrastructure and the backbone of this stack. And so if you remember, blockchain is still very young. So in 2009, an anonymous individual or group of individuals named Satoshi Nakamoto proposed the concept of Bitcoin in the underlying software blockchain. And so what excites me is that it's still we've come so far in just 10 years, but we're only just beginning. And so I bet you're thinking here either like, wow, this is super exciting. I hope you're thinking, wow, this is super exciting. There are so many changes. But for many of you also, you're probably thinking, well, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my job, for my company, for my industry, for my country? It's scary. Change is scary, particularly on this level of socio-cultural change from centralized to decentralized. And I get it, I understand. So as a final story, I'll tell you the story of when I was 18, I was a competitive skydiver. So when you jump out of an airplane, or when you fall in general, what do? Does anyone, like when you fall over? You scream. What else do you do when you fall? That is the right answer though. So you brace, you grab for something, you put your hands down, you don't just, put your head on the ground. So when you skydive, that's actually not what you do. So if you do that, if you put your arm out, you end up like this, flipping around, upside down, like totally out of control. But that's your conditioned response. That's actually what your body will do when you fall out of a chair or off the bed. And so it made me start thinking about conditioned responses in society. We've been conditioned to act in a certain way, in a centralized way. And so what I learned with skydiving was learning to unlearn. So I had to spend weeks to challenge my body's conditioned response to put my arms out and brace or grab for the airplane and just fall and relax. And this is kind of where we are with centralized systems. When I'm up here on stage talking about no hospitals and no governments and no banks and no schools, I sound crazy. And that's because that would be like me coming off of this stage and not putting my hands out. It just makes no sense. But that's what we need to do, is to unlearn, because that's how we land on our feet and embrace this change. And so with that, I'll leave you with 3 points to embrace this change, particularly as it relates to blockchain and decentralization in your organization. So 1, recognize that it's a paradigm shift. It's not just a technology, and so to understand it fully, dig deeper into why it happened. And so I've touched on some of these topics today, but it's a really good start to start understanding the shift from centralized to decentralized. 2, return to first principles in your organization instead of retrofitting. So I work with a lot of enterprise organizations that say, let's just use a blockchain for this. Slap this ledger on our existing systems and legacy software and it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't help. You might as well use a database for that. So in order really to reap the benefits of blockchain, you need to start thinking differently and think of new business models. And 3, of course, adopt a mindset of abundance and not scarcity. And so when Google opened up all of their data in 2005, many people thought they were completely insane. How would they make money if all these other companies were taking advantage of it? But it offered the backbone for the trillions of dollars of a new economic model that we see today, and for most of those services that everyone in this room has used. And so the final picture, this is Henry Ford, and the rather cliche comment, but a very powerful comment, is that before he made the first automobile, the Model T, if you went around and asked people what they'd want, they'd say a faster horse. They just couldn't conceive of what could come next. And we're sort of at that moment right now with blockchain. It's, you know, if you said what people want, they'd say maybe a faster database, which is not really what a blockchain is anyway. And so we're at that moment. And this is a unique moment in human history, and what excites me the most about it is that we finally have this chance to restore the connections between ourselves and with each other and with the products that we consume and with the environment, that we've broken that trust over the past decade. And so we're working together to restore trust, and we've only just begun. So thank you.